السلام عليكم إخواني وأخواتي المقبلين على جهة مباراة التعليم بالتعاقد. Welcome guys again in this new video concerning always English didactics. Actually this video mainly is mainly devoted for error and mistake differences. What is an error and what is a mistake, and how they are related together. And we are going to move to error sources. What are the sources of errors? And the third point, we'll move to, or we get through error correction types. And the last point, we will tackle the techniques of error in the mistake correction, or error mistake correction techniques. So let's turn on this presentation quickly. Get set. And let's go. So let's start with the differences between an error and a mistake. Let's begin with what is a mistake. Actually, a mistake can be either be a slip of tongue or a temporary deficiency in producing language. It is just a slip of tongue or a temporary deficiency in producing language. Just focus on these two things. Mistakes can occur when learners are tired or when they are unwillingly fail to apply grammar while speaking. Generally, mistakes are self-corrected. They are corrected easily, since learners promptly notice them. If they don't, a simple hint from the teacher or other learners would suffice to make learners aware of their mistakes and accordingly correct them. Another thing related to mistake, a mistake is just a lapse made at the surface, just at the surface. So let's go through what is an error. An error is a repeated mistake. A mistake, it is not repeated. It is not repeated. Just temporary. Error is always repeated. Is a repeated mistake. It is suggestive of the learner's failure to grasp a structure or apply it properly. For instance, if a student says repeatedly she must instead of must, it implies that he has not fully grasped the rules governing models or is not acquainted with them altogether. An error is a lapse that indicates a deficiency in the deep surface, which is It is incompetence of the linguistic code. The learner is incompetent or has lack of competence of the linguistic system of a language. Error is a systematic mistake. It can't be easily corrected. So the learner should use his or her consciousness to correct himself or herself. He or she should pay attention to his or her error in order to correct himself or herself. We have seen so far the differences between an error and a mistake. And now we'll move on to the sources of error. Where does errors come from? Or where do errors come from? So the sources of errors, there are three main sources or reasons of errors. Let's begin with the first one. We have interlingual interference or the interference of L1 in the learning of L2. Interference occurs between two languages or more. It is L1, usually L1 causes in your L2, interferes in your L2. It occurs or it takes place at different levels: morphological, phonological, semantics. For example, the interference of Moroccan Arabic into English. You transfer certain linguistic characteristics from L1 into L2. Let's have an example. Like many Moroccan students say, I have 17 years old instead of I'm 17 years old. This shows evidently that the source of error is the interference of L1 Moroccan Arabic in L2 English, or French intervenes in learning English in L2, which is English. This is salient, the interference of French in English. For example, we have library and library are not the same. It includes all the structure rules, lexical, morphological, phonological, and semantics. Sometimes it happens when we want to translate a word or an expression, we fail. We fall into a translational error. So let's move to another source of error, which is intralingual interference or overgeneralization. Actually, students gradually learn grammatical rules of the language. As they do, they form hypotheses about the language on the basis of their prior linguistic language. It often results in them falling in the trap of overgeneralization. Means when we overgeneralize rules and apply them to exceptions, and irregularities. When we have regular rules and apply them to exceptions and irregularities. For example, a student may say informations, believing that forming plural is done by adding s to nouns, or he shoots call his father. Since we think that the s of the third person singular in simple present must be applied to all verbs. Let's go on to the third and the last source of errors. It is context of learning. It refers to the materials, atmosphere where the learning takes place, and it also includes the teacher. This later can also be a source of errors. Teachers' failure to explain a lesson adequately or clarify it, but wrongly, may lead students to make errors. The students might have learned the language wrongly from the first time. They may have learned a mispronounced word from the teacher and they always believe that this is the right and correct pronunciation of that word. This is what we call context of learning or the environment, the context. The context affects a lot in triggering to influence people in general. Now let's go directly to how some approaches and methods consider errors and mistakes. The first method we have audiolingualism, have communicative language learning, considers errors. Sorry, it is not communicative language learning, it is audiolingualism method, considers errors or mistakes are bad habits that should be avoided by students. And students who make mistakes errors must be penalized or punished. Let's move to the other. This is an approach, communicative language learning, considers errors are as tolerated, embraced. Mistakes and errors are part and parcel of the learning process. And this should be used as the basis to constructing knowledge. If we don't make a mistake, we can't learn. So let's go to the third thing, important thing in this presentation, error correction types. What are the error correction types? We have 4 types. The first type is self-correction. The teacher may help the student recognize his or her mistake or error and may also help him correct it. The student tries to correct himself or herself. The second type is peer correction. A student may be aided by his peer in identifying and correcting his mistake or error. Student with student correction mistake or error correction. We have the third type, class correction. The entire class may pay attention to the utterances of students, identify the mistakes in them, and correct them accordingly. The fourth type and the last type, we have teacher correction. When spotting a mistake made by a student, a teacher may intervene in order to correct it. This point is very important. It is preferable that the teacher makes students aware of their mistakes. Awareness is very important, consciousness. If they fail to know their mistakes, a teacher can resort to the entire class group for correction. If other students fail to see the mistake as well, the teacher can then correct him or herself. So let's carry on our presentation and move on to another thing. I think this is the last issue in this video. It is error mistake correction strategies. What are the strategies that we should be equipped with in order to correct errors and mistakes? The first strategy, it is repetition. This is typically used to correct pronunciation mistakes, especially for pronunciation mistakes. A teacher may verbally repeat the utterance of a student in order to correct the mistake in it. Let's have an example. A beginning level student may say, "I know him," pronouncing the word "I know him," pronouncing the word "know" as it is written. A teacher can repeat the word again and correct the student's pronunciation. The second strategy, we have reformulation. A teacher may reformulate a mistaken sentence in order to correct it. Like, "I like to play in soccer." Student's statement. The teacher's statement would be, "Oh, you like to play soccer?" This is reformulation. Let's look to the third strategy. We use body language and facial expressions. Like, believe or not, body language and facial expressions. Believe or not, language and facial expressions can help students realize their mistakes. A look of confusion coupled with hand gesture can make students aware of their mistakes. Along with verbal communication or spoken form, the non-verbal form of language or communication helps a lot. to correct as a strategy to correct students' errors and mistakes. Let's get through another strategy. We have students' repetition. When a student makes a mistake, a teacher may tell him or her to repeat the utterance, stop him at the mistake he made. Let's carry on to the last and not least strategy. We have note taking. Another useful technique for correcting language blunders or mistakes is by noting them down. A teacher may take a notebook and write down the recurring mistake, repeated mistake errors of his or her students, so that he or she can later on devise, create a remedial or set up remedial activity to correct them. Note taking is very important. The last strategy, we have self or peer correction. Either, for example, you ask your peer or colleague, do you think it's pronounced like this? Or do you agree with this answer? So this is the last thing, I think. So let's go over what we have seen so far. We have seen the difference between a mistake and an error, and we've got through the sources of errors, what are the reasons behind errors, and we moved on to the how do approaches and methods consider or see errors and mistakes, and we've gone through error correction types, and we ended up with error mistake correction strategies. So this is the end of this presentation. Thank you very much for watching this video, and see you in the next new video. Thank you.